So thinking back, I wanted to touch on a few things that were going on here. Understanding the flow of the day, we would love to have your questions coming in. So if you have any question on any of the topics that you want to flow in here, I'd love to have that. If you think about the rest of the day, we will be looking at a deeper dive, thinking about how this data reflects within the global market. We'll be looking at women, a survey looking just at the women within tech and what that shows us. We will be hearing from companies about how did they gather data and how did they begin using it. So if you have questions for that, please put that in now. We also will be having sessions looking at where some of our companies are going that extra mile, thinking about how do we measure, not just gather the data, but measure the effectiveness of what we're doing with that data in terms of our initiatives. We will then have a session this evening. In this evening session, we will be going deeper, thinking about those other topics in terms of hiring and promoting. We, across the 2 days, will be thinking about alternate routes, etc. So if you look later down within the session, if you think about if you want to sign up for other sessions, and we will be recording this, but I'd love to have you join us for these other sessions. In thinking about the report, what we need to do is to think about how we move forward. This is about bringing together what is best practice and to drive it forward. What you'll see on the later sheets and as we go through is this journey continues. You will have an opportunity to join us for drop-in sessions, for working lunches, hackathons. If there are topics that you believe we're not covering in enough depth, we hold bi-monthly hackathons where we will gather more best practice to expand our open playbook. Right. So let's think about now where we are in terms of moving forward in the piece. What we have is a report that you're downloading that is 16% of the tech workforce, but we know that that operates primarily within a bubble. What we want to think about is how does that fit into a wider piece? And so to do that, let me put in a piece here. We want to try and think about what is happening in Europe. We want to understand what is happening with women. So next I'll be bringing Lexi back in a few moments to talk about where are we in relation to data in thinking more broadly. In the meanwhile, please, if you can, think about what we're doing on social media. We are on This Works 2022, and it is on @TechCharterUK for Twitter. Super. So I will be bringing us in just a moment's time to hear from Lexi and her panel from what's happening more broadly.
Hi folks, hello everyone.
Hello.
Hey everyone. So hi everyone. If you were in the first panel with us just earlier, my name is Lexi Papaspirou. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Tech Talent Charter, and I'm really delighted to continue to be discussing some of the findings of the latest Diversity in Tech report with a fantastic panel that we have here today. The focus of this panel is the wider picture. So what I'd like to do is dig a little bit deeper on some of the points in the report, but then to hear from some fantastic individuals who have got really interesting and in some cases more deeper insights in certain areas than we at Tech Talent Charter collect in our report. So I would love to invite the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Vanessa.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Vanessa Vanelli. I'm CEO and founder of We Are Tech Women, which is a platform that provides free resources to women in tech. Our community of around 50,000 women. We do lots of things, conferences, awards for women in tech, podcasts, research. We have a jobs board. So really bringing the community together, but also that collaborative piece of promoting what everyone else is doing within the sector for women. So very proud to be a signatory of Tech Talent Charter as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vanessa. Diana, should we come to you next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Diana Roccano. I'm Senior Insight Manager at TechNation. So for those of you not aware of TechNation, we're the growth platform, digital growth platform that supports scale-ups across the UK.
Thank you, Diana. We'll come to you, Lawrence, next.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lawrence, and I'm working at Agoria, and that's the federation of or a community of tech industry in Belgium. So we've got more than 2,000 member companies in the tech industry. We represent about 300,000 people, so that's about 8% of the total workforce in Belgium. And what we do, well, we actually try to accelerate internal and external growth of our members, so lobby, business development, services. And we have partnered up with Artevelde Hogeschool, with NL Digital, with TTC. Why? Because there is also a lack of diversity and talent in the tech industry in Belgium. So that's why we're conducting a European project to improve I&D in Belgium.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lawrence. And let's go to Ilsa next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you first and foremost for having me today. I'm very excited to join this panel. So my name is Ilsa Evans. I'm a teacher at Artevelde University of Applied Sciences and also a researcher for the Level IT Out project. As Laurence was just saying, so we are a promoter of a European social fund project that wants to mainly work on improving diversity and inclusion in the Belgian tech industry. And for that, we've partnered up with some of the organizations that are present here. So excited to talk about this at a more wider level.
Thank you, Ilsa. And finally, last but not least, Jenny.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me as well. I'm Jenny. I work as a public policy manager for NL Digital, which is the trade association of the digital industry in the Netherlands. And we represent a bit more than 650 companies, ranging from big corporates to small SMEs. And of course, diversity and inclusion is a very important topic for us. And therefore, we also launched a national task force on diversity and inclusion, where we work together with the Ministry of Economic Affairs to really work on a public-private matter to work on this very important topic.
Great, thank you, Jenny. So hopefully everyone can see our panel has a really interesting kind of mix of very broad and very international perspectives, and I'm looking forward to digging into the international view a little bit later. But I'd like to start off with a question for Vanessa, if that's all right. Vanessa, I'm sure you heard in the previous panel that gender remains amongst our signatories the area of greatest concern when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Now, the Tech Talent Charter is B2B, so the information we collect from signatories is all from a business lens. But obviously, your organisation is doing a lot of work around speaking directly to women in the tech space. You recently did a fantastic piece of research, which if you haven't looked at is a great piece in collaboration with Ipsos Mori and Tech Talent Charter, so do have a look at that. It's referenced in the report. But Vanessa, could you tell us a little bit around what women are saying about working in tech and their experience of trying to of being in the thick of it when it comes to looking at lack of women in tech in general?
So, I mean, I'm going to reference the report that we did recently. And one of the most shocking statistics that was in that was the fact that 1 in 5 women are thinking of leaving the industry. Now, we could kind of attach that to the stats are not that dissimilar from the Great Resignation. But when you actually get under the skin of why, what was coming out in the report was the lack of clear and consistent kind of pathways to progress within an organisation. It was to do with, they seem to have an abundance of mentorship, which always seems to be the go-to in terms of, how do we fix the problem? But what was fundamentally missing was the sponsorship angle. So just to explain to those that may not be familiar with the difference is obviously a mentorship. Mentorship is coming from someone with that subject matter expertise. They can advise you and guide you. But a sponsor is a different kind of a relationship. A sponsor is someone that already knows enough about you that's going to put your names and open up doors of opportunity for you when you're not in the room. So that sponsorship takes a little bit more effort because obviously you have to be under the wing of a senior individual. They need to be opening up those doors of opportunity in terms of access to their network, access perhaps to work opportunities. But it's slightly deeper than a mentorship relationship. So that's the piece that was fundamentally missing. The ladies said they didn't know what sponsorship was. They didn't think it was available within their organisations. Even if they knew it, they didn't see it in its true form and how that would benefit them. Yet when you look at some of the other survey respondents that had benefited from sponsorship, they absolutely attributed it to progressing in their careers. So there were things coming up around sponsorship. There were things coming up about lack of transparent pathways in order to progress. there was a little bit in there around male allies and the fact that there were still elements where they felt their ideas weren't being heard. They were perhaps spoken over in terms of meetings. You know, I think the stat was 75% of the women surveyed say at least some men within their organisations were not allies. So that's quite a big number. So for me, what was kind of coming out of it is that allyship needs to be there, but what does that look like? The sponsorship needs to be there. Okay, so how do we pull those programs together? And actually looking deep into, okay, what is the pathway if you're sitting in this current position as a product analyst, and where do you go from there? And is that necessarily linear, or are there other areas that you can go into? So it's a lot of work for companies to do, to look at those pathways. But I think until we do some of that stuff, the sponsorship, the pathway clearance, and knowing what that looks like, then we're never going to get women into the senior roles. And that's where we're missing. You know, we have this issue attracting women to tech, which boils back down to curriculums at schools and what that kind of looks like. They thin out at the middle level where it's mostly tricky for women in their careers. And then as you get to the top, it's even thinner. And again, when we're talking about the 15 to 17% of women in tech, depending on which report you want to read, you also got to look at the diversity of those women, because if we achieve a bigger number, the 30 or the 40%, and everyone looks like me, then that's not progress, and that's not kind of, you know, where we need to get to. And again, another thing that came out of the report is that some of the women do feel that gender holds them back, you know, in terms of career progression.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. It's a fantastic report. I definitely recommend having a read of it. But some of the things that really stuck out to me, being a person who'd just written the Tech Talent Charter report, is, as you said, diversity in senior positions is the second biggest problem that was reported by signatories. And from your research, I believe that we found that women were saying that sponsorship programs were more effective for them. I mean, both program types were effective, but sponsorship was more effective than mentorship when it comes to developing people into senior roles. So it's just interesting food for thought. And I'm glad you defined, well, what is sponsorship compared to mentorship? Because sponsorship programs did not come up in the list of most impactful interventions that we were seeing signatories report. So it's a useful potential gap to address for organisations that are looking to improve particularly gender diversity, but other types of diversity as well. I would love to bring Diana in on this piece as well, because Vanessa, you've got the individual perspectives from women who are reporting their experiences. Diana, you have a really interesting research background in this area at Tech Nation from your work looking at founders. I know that you've looked at diversity lenses when you were looking at where is funding going and how is that being divided. What do you see from your research?
Sure. So it's a really tricky one. And actually today I was just reading up on the NatWest Rose review, which looks into female entrepreneurship. So it showed that, so they've been doing this review since 2019, and the number of women-led businesses have grown by a third since 2019. And in 2021, for the first time ever, women-led businesses have surpassed businesses that are led by men. So there's about 140,000 businesses created by women last year, and 10% of them were between the age of 16 to 25. So those that would be considered youths. But when we're looking at businesses and when we're thinking about like tech businesses and investment, particularly, especially when we think about VC investment, they exist solely, or mainly actually, to put money into tech businesses. So they're thinking about the innovation and growth of tech. However, when we look deeper into the VC ecosystem, there's only about 13% of senior people in the UK investment teams that are women. So it's very low. And then when we start going down into different like diversity metrics, so for example, if we look at those from Black backgrounds, it's about 1%. When we look at those from like Asian backgrounds, it's about 8%. So it's very tricky, because then because those that are in senior positions in VC firms that are making those decisions about where money goes, if you don't really have a representation of society, what we're finding is that these businesses that are led by women or different ethnicities, they're getting less funding. So what we're seeing, so typically in like a VC cycle of funding, you have Series A, which is around maximum like $10 million. And then Series B, which is about, it's like $10 to $20 million. Series C is about $20 to $50 million and so on. And as you go down that funnel for women, actually, as they're trying to raise more funding, the percentage of funding that goes to them decreases. So in the Series A, when they're raising less than 10 million, it's around 6%. When they get to Series B, it goes to 3%. When it's Series C, 2%. And it just decreases. But whereas with men, that increases. And you can see that proportion already, 6%, less than 10 million. Okay, that's the highest for women. But that's so low compared to about 80% for men. So there's a huge issue around there, around the type of, so the VC ecosystem, how it's made up of men versus women and then the different like ethnicities. But then also, yeah, so that is one of the main issues that we're seeing, and then how that funding is distributed, because then what you find is people tend to fund businesses where the founders look like them, or, you know, someone knows them, or, you know, okay, this is easy, and it's like a tick box exercise. It's like, okay, they went to the same school as me, or they've come through a warm recommendation, and, you know, if they can make their job easier in terms of doing less homework, and they're like, okay, this kind of fits what we're used to investing in, and we know this sort of works, then they don't really feel like they need to go outside of their comfort zone either. So this amount of money just going to the same type of businesses, and then it doesn't mean that obviously women or different, you know, people from different diverse backgrounds don't have the potential, but it's just that they're not getting the opportunities.
So I would love to jump in on this idea of opportunity, because I've seen in one of your reports recently, and we've touched on it a few times, and we've had an audience question about it as well, around social mobility. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's 43% of the VC funding that is assigned in the UK goes to people who went to one of 4 elite universities. And I think they're Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford and Harvard. And that came up from what you were just saying as well, Diana, this idea of people who look like me, people I know, people who are in my direct network, and people I talk to. And I'm really keen to get, particularly Jenny, your thoughts on this as well, because obviously Netherlands Digital is a very strong startup scene in Europe. And you have a lot of organizations that would fit into this startup profile. Are you seeing the same kinds of patterns across the channel?
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, we see a lot of the same numbers that Diana just shared. Yeah, I think in the Netherlands, like in general, the business culture and innovation culture we have is, well, I mean, it's a very innovative and open-minded country. I think it's also because we're a small country, so we have to be innovative. People like to try new things. That's why we also see a lot of companies, whether it's through Brexit, but also before, a lot of international companies that set up shop in the Netherlands because they like to use the Netherlands as a test market, which is great. But I also see there that when it comes to the numbers, that diversity and inclusion, there's still a lot of work to do. I think, first of all, one thing that we definitely need to do better is also when it comes to data. So that's also something that we are working on right now, also with some of you here. So I think that is a very important start, also from a policy perspective, to really understand what those numbers are and have the right metrics. But I think, secondly, when it comes to more of the international talent as well, I mean, because we're such a small country, it is really important for a country like the Netherlands to also attract international talent and therefore also more diverse talent. And I think also there, I've seen a few trends lately. I think, first of all, one thing that we are trying to do more is to put more effort in also retaining international talent. For example, we have a lot of international students that come to study in the Netherlands. But then we also, of course, would like them to stay and work for some of our companies. So that is something that we put more focus on, to retain that international talent, because I think also there, because there is such a shortage in talent, we all know as companies, I think, that we need to get in contact with talent soon. So also when they are still in school or when they just graduated. So I think there is a big opportunity and something that the Netherlands is really focusing on to retain international talent, international students. And I think the other thing that is quite interesting, and as far as I know, it's a new scheme in the whole of Europe, is a Fisa scheme that has been launched last year by the Dutch government. which is focused on attracting international tech talent by combining salary with equity in the company. Because I think especially for a lot of startups and scale-ups, it has been very difficult to attract tech talent and also to keep them, especially international ones. First of all, because salaries are very competitive and high. And as a startup or scale-up, you cannot always pay that salary. And I think secondly, when it comes to retention, because a lot of smaller companies put a lot of effort in attracting this international and diverse talent, but a lot of times within a year or 2 years, they move to a big corporate because they have better benefits, they have a higher salary. So it's very difficult for those small companies, although they want to invest in diverse talent, to actually keep that talent. And I think a scheme like this, where you combine salary with equity and attract them in that way, also helps with retaining that talent in your company and gives them a different motivation to stay with the company. And what we also see there, that especially a lot of women are interested in a scheme like that, because they also want to work for a company where they believe in. And by giving them equity in a company, and it already starts, I believe, with 1%, so it can be very low, but it just gives them a different way of why they want to join your company. So I think those are a few examples of that I think could also be very relevant for other countries around us, like the UK.
Fantastic, thank you, Jenny. Now we've had a couple of questions, and I would say to everyone that's watching, please do feel free to keep putting your questions through to us. As I'm sure you can see, every single person on this panel has got an international outlook. They either have an international network, or they're from a different country than the UK, looking after tech needs and the digital needs in different regions. And one of the really exciting things, and one of the reasons why we wanted to have this panel in particular, is that someone's actually asked this question directly. Does TTC take a bit of an international lens on any of our research? And we're really excited to say on this panel, for the first time publicly, that actually it is something that we are now looking at. So what you might have seen is, if you've read through the report, you'll notice that we surveyed around the country of signatories' headquarters to try and get a sense of, are there differences that stem from culture of where the HQ is based. And we also got a lot of emerging questions throughout this year around how we can better support signatories to navigate diversity and inclusion challenges across borders. There are lots of organisations that do operate internationally, and doing that across regions can be difficult for a number of different governance or legal reasons. And so I'd love to bring in Lawrence and Ilsa at this point to talk a little bit about the fledgling collaboration we have between Tech Talent Charter and all of the organisations here. So Ilsa, first, how are we working together on an international scale?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that question. I also saw it appear. So from our point of view, when we started with this project with Level IT Out, we immediately wanted to have that international approach. This is a European project by its nature, because we felt in Belgium as well, we are struggling with certain things, particularly when talking about shortage in talent in the tech industry. But we knew that this was not just a problem in Belgium, that this is something reoccurring across many European countries. And we also felt like there's so much to learn from other countries as well. And that's why from the get-go, we wanted to involve NL Digital from the Netherlands and TTC from the UK, because we knew that there would be some practices that maybe you already apply that could also be applicable to the Belgian context, or if lightly adapted, that we could apply that to the Belgian context. And just the fact that so much data has already been collected in the UK was, for example, a huge inspiration to us to see that kind of industry benchmark, and something that we also would like to replicate. I know from Agoria's point of view, we definitely want to replicate that in Belgium, and also in the Netherlands. It would be very interesting for us to have such a big data collection as well, to really see as an industry, how are we doing and how can we progress. But we also know, okay, we can focus on our own countries, but it's important to, like you said, look across borders. I think for many tech companies, or just about all tech companies, are looking outside of their own countries, are recruiting international talent from all across Europe. So I think it would be great to have this kind of collaboration, to kind of see how we can collect this data together, and to see kind of which best practices to share. For example, from our project point of view, we're also in the midst of developing a platform quite similar to the playbook that TTC has, to also for our from our Belgian perspective, to share any kind of, any information, any sources that we might have to help people in the industry that really want to work on DEI. I heard from the previous panel, as Debbie said, there's so many resources out there, as you said as well, Lexi, there's so much information out there. We also want to create something very similar in our Belgium context, also a similar platform. But I think, just doing this together and kind of leveraging this partnership and making it bigger, I think could have a big impact on the industry across Europe, definitely.
Fantastic, thank you, Ilsa. So if anyone is operating in the Netherlands, in Belgium, who wants to get involved with this conversation around how we can share resources with different organisations in different parts of the world to support a collective D&I effort, we'd be really keen to hear from you. So please do get in touch with Tech Talent Charter so that we can try and facilitate some more conversation around that. I'd love to go to you, Lawrence, to ask a bit of a continuation of this question. We had a long conversation about it before this panel around what's the difference that you see looking at what's going on in Belgium versus the diversity and inclusion efforts in the UK. Where is the UK getting it right, and where are we potentially missing an opportunity?
Well, I think the UK is ahead of us, so we've got a lot to learn from you, and that's also one of the advantages of working together on this European project. Because we see Netherlands is ahead of us. I think UK is ahead of the Netherlands. So we've got a learning curve. We have a lot of examples we can follow. So this is a good thing. And in just to quickly tell you, the European project, ESF project we're doing, we were actually aiming for 3 things. So first, we wanted to measure. We wanted to map out what is the current state of I&D in Belgium. So we wanted to feel the level of inclusion employees experience and what actions were already being taken by companies. The second part was what we wanted to sensitize organizations. We have set up a learning community of 10 companies that come together every month to share best practices. And we also had an inspiration day in October. And then the third action is what Ilse said, developing a platform where companies can go to. And in the survey we conducted to measure the current state, all the stakeholders in a company said, it's important to work on I&D. And the main reason was access to diverse talents. But there was a big unawareness that I&D actually leads to better company performance, to better innovation, to attracting talent. So that was one of the things I found in the TTC report this year, that the importance of creating awareness, that's actually the same what we saw in our survey. And to be honest, it was also an eye-opener for me that you need to keep on working on awareness. It's like an ongoing process. It's not just step 1 and then you take other actions. No, you need to keep on doing that. So I think that's something important for us to learn from the UK. Keep on working on awareness.
So that's a really interesting point, because with our first panel, we can see that building awareness activities they rise and then they fall off as an effective intervention, depending on how mature that organisation's diversity strategies and tactics are working. I'd really love to rope Vanessa into this question a little bit, because we've had a really interesting question from the audience around sponsorship. The question here is, how do you mitigate sponsorship sounding like or looking like favoritism if a senior leader is focused on a specific individual? So that's something that we haven't really talked about from the point of view of, collective bodies that are maybe earlier on in their diversity and inclusion journey, like Lawrence was just speaking about. How do we tackle something like that, where, if you're running a sponsorship program, you're already ahead of the curve, but how do you do it well?
You do it excuse me, you do it in cohorts. And that's the way that I've seen it done in many different companies. So you have a cohort of 2 or 3 individuals aligned to a senior leader. So then there's no favoritism. It's not picking individuals out. Because the beautiful thing about that, and I'll give you a prime example, is that cohort will actually learn to mentor each other. So you've got the sponsorship at the top, and then you've got the mentorship. And I'll just say a quick story. So there was a gentleman, again, had a group of women that were talking about, the need for sponsorship. So he said, right, I'll take a cohort of 3 in terms of my kind of my sponsoree cohort. And he spent some time with them, a couple of meetings with all three ladies, looking at what they'd done in the past, what they delivered, where they felt the gaps were, what they wanted to see access to. And then he kind of did some own inward looking around, okay, so what doors of opportunities can open to these ladies? So one of the first things that he did is he took all three along to one of his senior exec meetings. And as he walked in, he said, these ladies are part of a sponsorship group. They're just here to observe. And the ladies sat there, but he introduced them. So straight away, they had access to his network. So they got to know what it was. You know, they got just a minute of the meeting, just say, this is who I am, this is the department I'm working in, this is the kind of stuff that I'm interested in. So although he was their sponsor, all of a sudden now, by him using his own reputational capital in that room, those gentlemen, and there were a few women in that room, was like, oh, okay, he could see what he's doing. So there was a little bit of, why not we not doing this kind of stuff? You know, they got to meet the ladies, they got to find out a little bit about them, and the ladies observed. And one of the other things that he did, which I thought was really interesting, is when he had to go off to a meeting in his particular role, which was like 5 or 6 rungs above, it was quite a hierarchical company, but he would give them examples of his work. So he said, look, here's a bunch of papers that I've got to read, and I've got to make an informed decision based on what's in these papers, you know, non-confidential stuff. He would give them to the cohort and say, have a look through those papers and tell me what decision you would make. No wrong or right answers. So he was actually sharing what it was like to do his role, even though it was much further up the stack, with these ladies. They was getting exposure to that kind of work. And that led to kind of maybe some aspirational stuff. Would they ever want to be in his role, or what did that look like? So that's just one example of what I feel is good sponsorship, but also having a cohort of ladies that can work together as a team. They've got their own shared and safe space, yet they've got somebody out there that's advocating for them in terms of their capability and also helping them to grow their network. Because at the end of the day, that's how things work. It's who you know and who gets exposure to you. And this is where it goes wrong, because sometimes there are individuals that get more exposure than others, perhaps because they're more extroverted or they're more confident speaking up in rooms, which when you look at the research, as much, and not to generalize for every woman, but you know, we don't tend to speak up as much as we should in meetings. So they're not the people that are getting the attention that they need. So by having this advocate that's actually being a voice for them is increasing their confidence, and then again more likely for them to get involved in other meetings. So a long-winded way of answering the question, but I'm very passionate about the topic as being an absolute one of the fixes. So yeah.
Great. So when looking at sponsorship, working cohorts, bring people together, and it doesn't always have to just be women in cohorts. It can be cohorts across intersectional lenses. Now, I'd love to bring Diana in here because we had a really interesting conversation about this beforehand. The sponsorship model that Vanessa's just described, there are accelerators and relationships between businesses, between startups and established businesses that function in a similar way. So when we're looking at the kind of the VC and startup landscape, businesses have relationships with other businesses, and if for a fledgling business, having contact with other organizations that are either financially or in other ways invested in supporting fledgling businesses, that can be a really critical resource, particularly for founders who find themselves to be in a real minority group or the odd one out in a room. Diana, could you tell us a little bit more about how sponsorship, what that looks like if it's in a B2B relationship, and how might some of the organizations that are listening potentially be able to support diversity across the entire tech ecosystem through their relationships with other businesses?
Sure. So even at Tech Nation, we have different growth programs that we run. So for example, there's the Libra program that just launched last year, and that for last year's cohort, it was looking specifically at founders that identify themselves as Black. But generally, across the different programs, so that's one, the Libra program, there's Rising Stars that look at early stage businesses, and then we have sector-specific programs like FinTech, AI, for example. But what these specifically do with the cohorts that they get, so the different companies that they have within that, is one thing the founders have said, which was really, really valuable to them, and what Tech Nation does really well, is connecting them with different founders. Because with the thing is, people don't really talk about so much, and which we saw with, for example, the founder of Monzo talk about his mental health, is that you don't really have that peer-to-peer network or support. So while the B2B aspect is really important, what really helps, as Vanessa was talking about, you know, with the mentorship and having someone within like your cohort that's going through a similar thing, we see that within businesses. You're a founder, there's different challenges that you're facing, such as raising capital, hiring. Those are the two main things that people say they have difficulties with, like access to finance and access to capital. If you have people within your cohort that you can speak to about that, but also understand what they've done before, what works, what doesn't, but also just having that support of someone that's going through the same thing as you, because most founders do talk about how it's actually like a really lonely journey. There's the highs are highs and the lows are lows. And you know, there's many times that people want to give up, but that support from your peers is really important. And so where businesses can help is really providing that solution where founders can connect with other founders. So that is sort of like B2B, but also just thinking more about it from a peer and network point of view.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jenny, I'd love to come to you on this as well, because again, Netherlands Digital is a real kind of nurturing collaboration, industry collaboration for this type of work. Are you finding the same needs are true, and are you finding that there's interesting crossover, I guess, for the UK tech centres and those on the continent? What are the similarities, and where can we potentially foster better relationships to support this type of sort of growth in diverse groups in tech?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, and I think it has been mentioned a few times already, I think when it comes to people working in tech, and I think especially in the tech sector, a lot of people don't even like a lot of these companies, they work cross-border. And I think also therefore, what we see in the Netherlands is that a lot of the companies that we are now trying to convince and work on D&I already work on D&I in countries like the UK. And what I see, especially a lot of the tech talent in their teams, and also the diversity officers and everyone who really wants to work on a topic, actually says it's super helpful to know that their own company or the company they work for already works on this topic in another country, and like internally it's easier to convince their own peers to therefore work on the topic. So I think that's one of the reasons why we should collaborate more, to also understand that a lot of the companies that we work for have offices all over Europe, the world. And when you're already measuring certain things, or when you're already working on certain actions in one country, why not do it in another country? Because I still think there is still a lot to learn. And I think also on the other hand, that's like Diana was saying as well, that when it comes to understanding what's going on, that really learning from peers is the most valuable part. It's very important to get experts in who can explain certain definitions and explain why it is so important to work on diversity and inclusion. But I think in the end, learning and hearing about the journey of peers who've been through the same, whether it's a founder or a junior woman in tech, I think that is very valuable. And I think especially also focusing on that junior part is really important, because what I see when it comes to visibility, a lot of times it's about very senior roles. And I think it's also very important if you're a young woman in tech who is just starting off her career, to also learn from others who are maybe only 5 years ahead of where you are right now, to also give you a realistic goal. Because I think also women and also other underrepresented groups, a lot of times when they hear a CEO speaking, they're like, okay, that's great, but that's not for me. And when they hear someone else who just turned from a junior into a senior role, then it's way more within their reach, they feel, and then it also becomes more realistic. So I also think there, when you look at the cross borders, it's also really important to share best practices and stories of peers who are really in the same range of you.
So what we're hearing from everyone, I think, here is this theme around advocacy and networks. And we've heard that both in terms of the problems with achieving good diversity, whether it's in the VC space or in, you know, the employee demographics. There's this issue about trying to advocate and support people by building connections between people, whether it's businesses or individuals. Jenny, you were just talking about this from the point of view of people starting out on their careers, and I'd love to bring Ilsa in on this, because obviously you work for a university, and obviously you speak to a lot of, I know we've spoken about this, a lot of women who are trying to get into the tech space and are seeing this kind of need. What does that look like at a higher education moving into the tech space for work? What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Lexi. Indeed, I was just talking actually to a student of ours who went to an event, kind of like an initiation on coding event, who said that, yeah, she didn't even know that that was out there, that would be something achievable to her. We see if we have any kind of sessions for students on digital skills, they're always very interested in that. But anything to do with mentoring, with representation is hugely important for our students, actually. Whenever we bring in guest speakers, whenever we use cases, examples of people who aren't often represented or don't always see themselves represented, we always see a huge boost in motivation and engagement of those students. So for them, it's really important to see people represented such as themselves. We have some great initiatives here in Belgium as well. I think that might be, that also might exist in other places, something like a seat at the table. We had some of our students contribute to that as well, where they recently had a kind of speed date with a CEO, 100 CEOs who did speed dates with a lot of very diverse young talent. For them, it's a great opportunity to meet with others and to be able to create that network, as was mentioned earlier. So important to make sure that and all of our students have the same networks. Whenever we have a kind of assignments or even internships and things like that, we just see that certain students have a much more difficult time getting into certain spaces. So yeah, building those kinds of communities or aiding students to build those communities and networks is so important, and something that I think can even be something that, as Yeni also said, I think companies can also reach out a bit more to schools and help them, get students in those communities a bit quicker, and do kind of those initiatives like the one that my student was talking about, just getting a bunch of people to come and visit them and to create that network and to create that sense of community. I think there's still a lot to do there as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And just if anyone's interested in looking at that route, Tech She Can is one of our sister organisations, the Tech Talent Charter, that's well worth looking at. So I'm going to do a whip round of everyone in the panel now. And this will be probably one of the last questions that I'll ask. We've heard about this broad idea of sponsorship. When it comes to diversity and inclusion across wherever you are, it's this idea of how do you forge connections that are meaningful and translate into true value for a person who is trying to progress from an underrepresented group. So I'd love to do a whip round. What are the things that organisations or people can or should be doing to try and facilitate these sponsorship type relationships to emerge? So Vanessa, I'll go to you first.
It's really interesting, Lexi, because we've been doing a number of recordings for a conference that we've got coming up, and I've been talking to a number of senior leaders. And also we've been talking to a number of community members. And the biggest thing that comes up is the ability to listen, to have channels where you can talk to the women in the organisation about their frustrations, right? So whether or not that's spinning up, we need mentorship, we need sponsorship, we need on-the-job training, we need greater visibility to opportunities, all of those different things. It all boils down to one thing, and that's the channels by which organisations listen to those employees. So whether or not that's setting up a Women in Tech ERG, so an employee relations group that can feed up some of that grassroots kind of, this is kind of what we need, whether it's something like that, whether or not it's skip level lunches. So just to explain what they mean, having a senior individual in a room with 10 or 15 women in tech, that's talking about their own challenges and what the company could do to move the needle. It's just creating those listening channels. So I think, sponsorship is absolutely fundamentally important, but there are so many other things around the periphery, obviously, which surfaced in our report, that also need addressing. So a big hill to climb, but one we can get to, no doubt. But it all starts with the ability to just have a listen.
You know what, that's something that's completely coming through in our report as well. I think gathering employee feedback and, listening for inclusion was in the top 6 across every single top performing diversity lens that we found.
Just to add to that, annual surveys, they need to go. They're at a point in time, they're at the end of the year, depending on how people are feeling. You've got to have that ability to be agile in terms of how you collect that feedback through events, through SharePoints, through online team chats, whatever it is, that you can actually get that feedback in real time and then show your employees that you're listening and you're doing something about it as well. So the follow-up is equal. It's all well and good listening, but how do you talk back to say, yes, we've heard you, and this is what we're doing? Because that's where you get the momentum and that's where you get the traction.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to Diana next. Diana, building powerful relationships to support diversity and inclusion.
Sure. So yeah, building on from listening, I think from there it's about building trust, because if you are listening to what people are saying and you're acting upon it, people will trust that there will be some action as a result. So I think so with that comes transparency within your workplace, understanding how things work. So for example, progression, why is it different from one person to another? There needs to be like transparency around those routes so people understand how things work, and then trust will naturally be built within an organization, because when there is a lack of trust, things that employer-employee relationship is just not stable. It's unstable. So whatever not unstable. So whatever you do say, what is the likelihood people are going to trust that something is going to happen if people are not listening, or if there's no transparency around processes within an organization.
Thank you, Diana. We'll go to Lawrence next as another B2B focused organization, building supportive networks.
Well, I would like to talk about women, for example, themselves. I mean, we need to speak up as well. We need to reach out and be open about what we want to achieve. And if it doesn't work, I mean, don't give up for the first time. I think it's really important to think about what are you looking in a sponsor. It's not only somebody who cheers for you or a mentor, somebody who sticks along the side. No, it's really somebody who's willing to take the first steps with you, who's got your best interests at heart, and who really wants to make publicity for you. Lately, I've been seeing this visual a lot on social media, like women are over mentored and under promoted. I think, I mean, that's exactly what it is. We put a lot of focus most of the times on women. They need to be mentored, but at the other side, I mean, there's the rest of the organization that needs to do their part as well, because even if you're mentored, how should I put it? If you come into a company where the rest isn't willing to take you up, then even if you're mentored, it doesn't get you further in your path. So I think be open about what you want to achieve, and think about what you want to find in a sponsor, that there's a match.
Yeah, let's go to Ilsa, and then I'm going to come to you, Jenny, for a final quick question. Ilsa, particularly from the students that you work with, what does it take? What should employers be doing to create really strong sponsorship opportunities for them?
As already saying, indeed, yeah, creating that community and reaching out to those students quite quickly. A lot of students right now really have quite a high focus on DEI, I would say. A lot of companies that are not paying attention and are not having that focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, having any statements or any values on that, are going to lose some of those some of that high skills, young potential. So really just focusing more on truly creating an inclusive culture. I loved what was said here earlier for this final question of listening and actually, taking actions based on what people are saying, because that sometimes, even when collecting DEI data, is a struggle, that people don't want to disclose any data anymore because they feel like nothing's happening with the data. So I would say really practicing what you preach and really putting a lot of effort into actually creating an inclusive culture and being true to that and actually sticking to that. I think that's something that a lot of young people nowadays are looking for, and looking for somebody, as Laurence was saying as well, a sponsor that that matches them, that will help them, that is going to give them opportunities that otherwise might be difficult for them to reach, but it's going to help them progress and what their career path might look like and what they want to progress in, actually. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Ilsa. So I'm going to close up here, but I'm going to throw a quick question to Jenny. We've heard throughout this panel, there's this broad piece about listening. When we're talking about listening, we're talking about hearing what people are saying, but often that involves data. And we've talked about data as well and the importance of data, both in the first panel and this panel. One of the questions that came in, which we haven't got time to go through today, but I want to just touch on, is this idea about how do we navigate these D&I data challenges, when in some places it's not legal to collect certain types of data, and when organisations are operating cross-border, that can be really challenging. So we've heard that obviously UK is doing better than some neighbours in some areas and not so well in other areas, but broadly speaking, we've got quite a mature discourse in the business community around diversity and inclusion. Tech Talent Charter, Netherlands Digital, we obviously had that conversation about how we can support each other with our kind of collaborative work here to try and create guidance that will be relevant across border. So I guess if we were having a bit of a call to action around how we can improve diversity and inclusion with that international lens, what's your call to action for the audience before we sign off today?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And I think it's completely true what you're saying. I think my call to action would be that, as I was mentioning earlier, that in the Netherlands, we also just launched a diversity and inclusion benchmark for the digital industry. We're doing it for the first time. We're learning a lot from TTC, but also there, if you are watching here and you are from one of the organizations that is already joining TTC, and also has a location in the Netherlands, or you know a company you work with a location in the Netherlands, and you're interested in joining the Dutch benchmark as well, yeah, please reach out, because we're still looking for companies. And I think, as you were also mentioning, Lexi, that it's also for you as a company very relevant to compare your different locations to see how they're doing, and also how you can exchange a lot of the knowledge from your own organization or from other organizations across the border to improve.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jenny. So that shout out, that final shout out, if anyone is operating in a region that is not currently being covered by the UK benchmarking, please get in touch with us. We already have Agoria from Belgium that we're working with. We have Netherlands Digital with Jenny, who've been on the panel today. So with that, I'll say thank you very much to our fantastic panel, a really wide-ranging panel looking at what's the same and what's different. So thank you all for your time. And Debbie, back to you.
Hello, everyone. So it's nearly the end of our session today, and I'm nearly to the end of my bucket of tea. Let's figure out where we are, where we're going. As promised, we've looked at the report. I've had some requests. Can't we get the report in such a way that we can download it, that it is more accessible, etc.? We will be putting that together and try to work in those accessibility issues in the coming weeks. We are behind the scenes, a very small startup in a not-for-profit way. So we're pedaling as fast as we can, but I'm delighted. Anyone tells us they want more so they can read more of the report, absolutely. We've also had some questions asking about, and we saw it cropping up here, what are we doing in schools? What are we doing about university education? What are we doing about upskilling, the basic digital skills within the workplace? Please know that when we work as the Tech Talent Charter, two things. One, we know that we do need to look at the entire pipeline, and that's vitally important. But also remember that from the first moment that we founded this, one of our mantras was we will not reinvent the wheel. And that's why we work with partners. So when people are saying, well, what are we doing in supporting women, etc., and women's focused events, those are vitally important. That's why people like Vanessa are vital, important partners to us for We Are Tech Women. If we're thinking about what happens in schools, you heard that Lexi mentioned there's an organization called Kpmg. It is a charity like us. It is companies coming together to think about what can they do in that earlier space, on early inspiration in schools, in apprenticeships, etc. If you have any question, look on our website. We're our key partners. You'll find out where you can link into Kpmg. When we think about universities or post-school education, we have a number of providers in the space who are signatories and always reach back to us as a provider so we can share that out. But we also work with Institute of Coding. This was given funding from government to look at how to reform what is happening in terms of computer science education, post-school education, further qualifications, and now the boot camps. But that is, again, about reimagining, removing barriers so that we can get more people of all different ages and backgrounds in through tech. So have a look at an Institute of Coding. Some of you know, if you're larger employers or even smaller employers, You have people in your workforce who, if you could just get them those basic business digital skills, then they'd be able to access those other pieces. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Our partners, Future.now, are companies coming together to look at how we can work in that space. So I'd say to you in that respect, we've also had questions across the year, as Lexi said, of why aren't we going global? What are we doing about global? We would never just jump into a new country. We will never go for global domination. We work with you as employers and with partners to understand what lifts easily from Tech Talent Charter into other things, what needs to be done slightly differently. So as Lexi says, if you are interested either in looking at what's happening in Belgium, in the Netherlands, we would connect you straight away. And I'd urge you to be part and support what's happening there as it then expands into Europe. But we will be holding sessions across this year, closed door sessions where signatories can come along to think about what is happening in terms of global data gathering, what is happening in different markets. So we're happy to convene those spaces to bring you together as employers to understand where we're going next in that respect. Okay, so what does that mean for today? We are reaching the end of this working lunch. I'd love it if you joined us this evening. This evening, we're going to have more of our employers rather than our experts standing outside. These are employers beginning to talk to us, to think about what is interesting in this space. We're going to be hearing from Beasley from an insider's view. What does things like the report and the festival mean in the day-to-day life of their company? We will be looking at hearing from companies about different stages of the journey. Remember, I promise you as the Tech Talent Charter, what we will always try and do in our sessions, have people from small companies, medium-sized companies, large companies, look at companies who are early in journey, been there a while, been there a very long while, and can share what they're learning. So we'll be looking at how are companies using data. And those of you that were asking questions about, well, it's fine to measure diversity, but what are you doing about inclusion? What are you doing about engagement? How are you doing it? You'd want to join us for our session this evening. You'd also want to look at, some of you are getting to the point of you beginning to put together initiatives, beginning to think about what's next. Anything we'd do in business, we'd measure impact, wouldn't we? We'd measure to see if there's a return on investment. This evening, we'll hear from companies that are beginning to do this and are beginning to be able to be surprised by some of the things the data has. I'm delighted that you heard today some of those key issues around things like the leadership and management. How are we increasing? And we just heard from the last panel some super suggestions on things to do in terms of increasing representation in those areas. And you heard Ed Lead and you heard Jacqueline throwing down the gauntlet. That better move up the chart by next year. If you're not sure how to do that, where to do that, you want to join us tomorrow for the working lunch. Equally, there were 3 or 4 years ago, we talked about flexible working and a key way to do it. And a lot of companies just said it's too hard. We could never make virtual work in the tech teams. Well, COVID broke that. What we want to do is 2 years later to see what have companies learned about diversity and inclusion in relation to that flexible working and all of those dimensions of flexibility. So we'd love to see you for that. You heard the discussions about alternate routes. Some of you've noted that this has to be part of something long-term, not just short-term. If you're not sure where to begin, if you don't know what's out there, how you might access, join us for the session on alternate routes. And then last but not least, some of you in the room, and you've been asking us since last year, want to understand what could we do in terms of neurodiversity, disability, LGBTQ+, social mobility. How do we move forward? What we'll be bringing to you in the last session is hearing from companies who've taken what they've learned from working in gender and expanded into these other areas to bring down barriers, to work with people in the company to make it more inclusive from those other perspectives. Okay, so if you haven't signed up for one of those sessions, cursor down, sign up for the sessions. We want you to join us. If you want to, we're going to take the time out before this evening. If you want to keep listening, we will have some interesting content. We will have some of our best tasters from past sessions in the year and some top tips from a range of employers that you can just pick up on and listen as we do it. What should be hitting your inbox, if this is the only session you've signed up for, I really want to know what worked, what didn't. Now, I've made it super easy. We've worked with the team. There are faces. You just have to choose which face you want. The happy smiley face, the grumpy it didn't work face. Please fill that in. Please let us know what's working in that respect. Love how some of you are already sharing things on social, sharing questions on social. Please keep that up. Bring that across to us. And then last but not least, carry on the conversation. If this is the last session for you and you're not going to be joining us for the rest of the festival, do tune in later. We'll give you some links where you can hear some of it again, but don't make this your last conversation with us. If you are already a signatory, come back to us about that global project, thinking where we go from here. Think about joining a hackathon. Some of you have said we're using data tools. We use them really effectively. Some of you want to learn about it. Well, we're having a hackathon looking at how do you use data-led tools to attract diverse talent. Now, that's sponsored for us by CW Jobs. We're looking at what are the creative approaches to developing your diverse leadership pipeline. So what you heard today in the session, if you have stuff to share, join us for a hackathon. We'll be working, Kpmg is sponsoring a hackathon looking at how do we create a really inclusive culture that allows neurodiverse people to flourish within our tech teams. And last but not least, we'll build on what we're going to be talking about in the session. What are the systems? What is the culture? How do we support inclusive hybrid talking? So if you join any of our sessions and you're thinking, hey, I know a lot more about that. Why aren't they talking about this? Then you want to join one of our hackathon teams. And then have a look at our playbook. Have a look at what you see in the report. See what you need. Join us for a drop-in session to carry on that conversation. What's working for you? What's not? How can we help you? And if you haven't joined the Tech Talent Charter, that's a whole different conversation. We'd love to have you join. It is free. It is for any organization that has a vested interest in this space. You can be an employer, you can be a supplier, you can represent a underrepresented group within this place. Come in the tent, join the choir, learn how to sing, allow us to help you share what you know is working, learn from others in the space to collaborate and change the entire shape of this tech ecosystem. It's free to join. It's quick to do. We have some sign-up sessions that you can look to just come have some questions and answers about that. Everyone, crazy time of year, crazy day, crazy world. Thank you for taking 2 hours out of your day to join us for this working lunch. I hope to see you again in a few hours' time for our evening cuppa and tomorrow. If not, don't make this a last conversation. And then, as you heard from this morning, be bold. Move forward. It's time. There's no cavalry. There's no one coming to rescue us. We need to take action today. My name's Debbie Forster. I am the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter. Thank you to Beasley as our headline sponsor. Thank you to my principal partners and my team behind me who makes this work. I will see you. Shh, I'm going to end 7 minutes early. You don't have to tell anyone else what you do with these 7 minutes. It's our Tech Talent Charter gift back to you. I hope to see you this evening. Bye-bye.